Every once in a while, we get lucky. On one of my previous videos, someone had recommended I check out the size 6 first focal plane LPVO. When I reached out to ATI, or Armament and Technologies Incorporated, to inquire about the size 6, they couldn't be happier to provide one for review. That one scope ended up turning into two when they sent me an Elk Inspector 1.4. And from there, it evolved into this. The Tangent Theta 525 Professional. You don't buy it because you want to. You buy it because you can. You buy it because you never had kids. And if you don't spend your money, Uncle Sam will. This thing is the definition of stupid, but in all the right ways. And this scope is about as uncompromised as I have ever come across. With 8 total reticle options and 2 color combinations, this thing really does fit the bill for anyone that's looking for this specific scope. But before we look through it anymore, let's take a quick look at what comes inside the box. For the uninitiated, if you do not know or have ever heard of the name Tangent Theta before, to give you a real quick backstory, they fall under the Armament Technologies Incorporated umbrella. Inside that umbrella, you have Tenebrex caps, which are made in Canada. You have the size 6, which is currently made in Japan. You have Elkins, which are made in Canada as well. You have their unpronounceable red dot series, which I cannot pronounce, nor will I try to pronounce. And then you have Tangent Thetas. Tangent Thetas are all made in Canada. So before you could even contemplate just how much more expensive that might be because of where it's made, these things go for roughly $5,800. 5800 United States dollars. Now, for many of you, you're going to instantaneously click off of this video because that is just an absurd number, and you've probably bought cars, such as I have, for much less than what this scope costs. But if you are curious to see what a $5,800 scope looks like as far as its overall feature set, its build quality, and its glass performance, stay tuned, because this thing really has changed a lot for me. The glass clarity on this thing, all spoilers told, is better than I could actually pick up with my camera setup. The way it captures light and refracts it back into your eye is unlike anything I have ever experienced, and for the price, it better do so. But keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this is still only a 5x multiplier scope. It is a 5 to 25. There are a lot of other scopes on the market, such as Gen 3 Razor HDs, which are 6x multipliers in the 6 to 36 category, which we will be looking at later. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think Tangent Theta and the guys and girls over there that are developing these things understand that you don't really need more magnification to be able to perform at the highest level. Sometimes simpler is best, and we've been seeing a resurgence in that concept and mindset more recently as, well, the Mark IV HD series from Leupold, which all use 4x multipliers, and so far, from my personal experience with them, have been performing exceedingly well. We will continue to talk about that sort of mindset throughout the rest of the video, but first, let's take a look at what kind of a box houses a, as near as makes no difference, $6,000 rifle scope. Well, if you are familiar with the size 6 video, which if you haven't seen, go check that out, it's basically the exact same box that houses a $1,300 LPVO. So, TT does not go about giving you a giant, fulfilled luxury box with their basic luxury item. Cracking the very thin cardboard box open, you will see that there's very high density foam that is precisely cut for all of the components that are inside this box. One such item that is included is a kill flash, which is pretty cool to see. Also note that because this is under the ATI umbrella, that everything is already pre-cut to accept Tenebrex caps, which makes sense. Why wouldn't you want to put your own caps on every scope product that you produce? Pretty damn smart. And I must say that Tenebrex caps are very nice. I do plan on doing my own independent video on Tenebrex caps, so hopefully you'll see that in the eventual future. As far as the weight on the kill flash by itself, on my scale, it's just over 1.6 ounces, which isn't all that much. Tangent Theta was nice enough to give me the opportunity to choose whatever reticle I wanted, and I ended up going with the Gen 3 XR Fine. The reason for that was it was the most similar to a lot of other Christmas tree reticles that I had seen from a lot of different manufacturers, and I figured it would be a great way of comparing this directly more to those. Also included is a plastic coin so you don't mar up the battery compartment housing, as well as a nice little Velcro patch with Tangent Theta on it. The included owner's manual is very thick, well illustrated, and beautifully done, and gives you a ton of information. If you are buying a scope and you want to take it seriously and know all the ins and outs, Something like this will give you the majority of all the answers you could ever possibly ask for, such as right there. There's all the useful information that you could use to compare this against other scopes that we'll actually be comparing with later. But for right now, let's pull this thing out of its hibernation chamber and see what it looks like more closely. The attention to detail on even the way that they cut the foam and stacked it to house those wonderful Tenebrex caps is really impressive. It fits in there exceedingly well and very snug. They also used a nice big chunk of foam around the erector housing and main tube, so this way it cradles it in there and keeps it all nice and centered. The top part that does house the kill flash also sandwiches it around it, so you don't have to worry about this thing banging up in any way, shape, or form. It's a way of protecting this scope without being excessive. For many of you that are in disbelief about why this thing costs so much money, part of the reason is right there, made in Canada. Along with picking the reticle, I was also able to choose the color, and I went for FDE because I love scopes that are not black. Any sort of coloration on my rifles is welcome to see, and I always like to see what kind of FDE tone some companies go with. This is more of, it's an in-between like a gray and a brown. I really like it. It's flat enough where it's not going to have a lot of reflection coming off of it, but it doesn't match the caps whatsoever. The weight on my scale is almost perfectly as advertised, which is about 40 ounces, not including the caps, which is about, as near as makes no difference, perfect. For anyone that is unfamiliar with how Tenebrex caps work, they only fold to that degree. They do not fold flat like Vortex Defender caps, but the nice thing about this is they lock on that ring and can be indexed basically 360 degrees around and really do feel fantastic in hand. All Tenebrex caps are made in Canada, which is something that you don't really see all that frequently. The one thing I don't really like is that they're not going to be as weather sealed around the ocular lens, such as, again, Vortex Defender caps, which have this really nice soft rubber boot that slides on and covers up a lot of the components. Moving on from the caps, let's take a look at the eyepiece, which is fast focus yet locking, which is wonderful to see. The outside texture on this is very aggressive. It's very thin, but allows you to get a nice solid purchase on there to unlock it. There is zero weird sounds, feel, or anything to it. Basically silent. And that lock, once it's locked up, is absolutely rock solid. I'll have enough purchase on this to turn this with ease. All the way out, quarter turn in. A very small amount of play, but so small you can barely feel that it's there. With the lock ring engaged, absolutely rock solid. The anodizing on all these surfaces so far looks basically identical. And if we lock that up just like that, you can see this thing really doesn't go anywhere. We're already off to, in my opinion, a very good start. But let's take a look at the magnification ring. Moving right along to the magnification ring. Maximum magnification is at 6 o'clock and minimum is at 12 o'clock for a 180 degree sweep, which is completely standard across the board. One thing I'm not the biggest fan of is they give you this little tiny thumb ramp, and that is it. It is molded, well, it's machined out of the same piece of aluminum, which makes up the entire magnification ring, but it's really small. There is no way of adding on to it. You would have to get an aftermarket throw lever for this thing if you wanted it. And if you're thinking, oh, I could just pinch it and grab the outside because it's got an aggressive texture on it, you'd be wrong. It is extremely slick and smooth. Those little scallion cuts on the outside really don't add that much as far as purchase capacity goes. So if you do think that you're going to get this and be able to turn the magnification in a quick fashion, you're going to have to buy something aftermarket for it. Despite that, though, it still feels very well damped, very smooth, and with no weird noises or any sort of hang-ups. And one thing that I do appreciate is that the magnification number itself is on this little angled piece that is facing towards the eye of the shooter. So if you were curious about what magnification you're at, you literally peek your head up just a little bit and you can see the exact magnification right there in front of you. From there, we're going to check out the illumination control, which goes from 0 to 11 with offs in between each position. This has the exact same scallion cut that we saw on the magnification ring, but its smaller size feels a little bit more, how should I say, aggressive in hand. It does turn extremely smooth and has a very nice, lovely detent to it. And I love how recessed the cap is, so this way you'd never have to accidentally worry about unscrewing the cap for the battery compartment unintentionally. However, just like with the size 6, they have hard stops on either end, and unfortunately it's on maximum when you turn it all the way clockwise looking at the face, the exact same thing that we saw on the size 6. I do not know why they just didn't put an off past that. I guess they did it for a reason unbeknownst to me, but it's just something to take note of. The detent on it feels nice, sharp, and crisp, and it feels like you're really engaging each little individual component with every minute change that you make. The one nice thing about having an illumination control with hard stops on either extreme is that when you go to remove the battery compartment to change out the battery, you don't have to worry about the thing slipping out of your fingers. The included battery compartment opening tool makes light work of it, and as you can see, it comes out 1, 2, 3. Removing the cap reveals a very stout looking battery compartment. There's a giant O-ring on the cap itself, and the battery is held in there securely with some very large fingers. In fact, it's held in there so securely I had to use a razor blade to get underneath it. Underneath it is unlike any other battery compartment that I've seen. This is the first time I've seen a battery compartment this nice anywhere. It looks so well done, and the battery is literally held in there with a very clear, positive snap. I wish every compartment was like this. Taking a closer look at the very large O-ring on the bottom side of the cap, and you can see that even if those fingers were to fail, that thing's going to put very positive pressure on that battery so it doesn't come loose whatsoever. There's also a decent sized O-ring on the very outside edge of that cap so you don't have to worry about water or dirt getting inside the compartment. Moving on to the side parallax, Tangent Theta claims that it has a 50-meter minimum to infinity. It's only about a 180-degree sweep, but I found that this was more than adequate for any environment that I took it to. The knob is very large and allows for a very finite amount of adjustability, so you can make sure that you get whatever target that you're focusing on in absolute perfect clarity. Again, there's no surprise with this knob. It feels absolutely sensational, damped perfectly fine, and couldn't be much better. The scallop cuts are again very similar to what we saw on both the magnification ring, but unlike that, they're a little bit deeper, very similar to what we see with the illumination control, and allow for a little bit better purchase. The last thing we must talk about before we get behind the glass is probably also one of my favorite things. These turrets, albeit non-locking, feature a very nice zero stop, but a very cool toolless resettable feature. The sound and feel on these things are unlike anything that I've experienced. I've gotten close. I've gotten really close with other scopes, but not so much like this. To prove that there is no locking feature, I do everything under the sun to try to get them to lock or unlock, but as you can very clearly see, they don't do anything. But that is perfectly fine. To show you what these things look like underneath the caps is really going to help cement why these things cost as much as they do. The attention to detail on all the machine surfaces is aero-grade space nice. I know this because I part-time work in an aerospace machining shop, and I know exactly what kind of surface finishes this must have taken them to make sure that they got everything right. To undo the turrets, it's a couple of turns of this really nice big finger adjustment screw, and you can see that is how you adjust your zero and then remove it. I'm going to roll in some still shots to try to get a better view inside there, just to have you hopefully appreciate just how well this thing is made. Just look at that thing. Look at how beautiful that erector housing is. I've never seen anything more nicely finished in my life when it comes to the internal components of a scope. This was done by a company that did not care about what the scope was going to cost because they knew people were going to buy it. As to who would buy this, we'll talk on that later. But for right now, they spared no expense making sure that everything on this thing was truly polished to perfection. Just look at the inside of the cap. Both the windage and elevation look identical. There is a real high level of precision here. All those screws are Loctited down, so you don't have to worry about them coming loose. The way the zero stop functions is very simple. You just turn it all the way, and that's it. It's done. And for anyone out there that has a negative approach on things, and you're thinking that I'm shilling for Tangent Theta, that they told me, that they begged me to talk highly about the scope, well, I'm very happy to tell you that you're wrong. I just have a really nice appreciation for the finer things in life, even if I can't afford them. And now I'm going to shut up so you could hear just how good these things sound. When I say there is zero play, there is zero play. Hard stop at 13.8 or 28.8 mils of total rotation, and we do at least have a zero stop. The exact same sound and feel. Look at that. Look at how much torque I'm putting on this thing with my fingertips. There is no slop. Six plus mils in both directions. Wow. Wow is right. That's all I have to really say about that. With that, we are done with this physical overview. Let's see how well this thing really does perform when we get behind it. The Gen 3 XR fine reticle as seen here at 5x is pretty damn good. The posts at 3, 6, 9, and 12 are nice and thick and taper off very fine towards the center. Basically as if the reticle implied exactly what this thing is. We do start off here at 5x, and that center is, well, pretty hard to pick up. Again, this scope is not going to be for everybody, nor is this reticle. If you would prefer something else, they offer 7 other different variables of reticles, so go check those out in depth. And I'm pretty sure if you're going to drop the coin on one of these, you would do your homework and ensure that you get the perfect reticle for yourself. If you are like me and you enjoy Christmas tree reticles on larger magnified optics such as this, then once you get this into its working magnification range of about 10x plus, it really does come into its own. That beautiful fine center dot is an excellent aiming point for those very precise shots. The reticle itself is very easy to pick up and read. There's no confusing lines, there's no confusing mismatched numbers. It's stupid simple, easy, and rudimentary. The one thing that tangent Theta does do differently is they do those big blobs at 1 mil increments as opposed to larger hash marks. It might not be for everybody, but it does stand out against the crowd. I did take a screenshot of this reticle and post it on the community tabs, and many people picked up immediately that it was a tangent Theta simply because of those 1 millimeter blobs. The illumination on this thing is a little on the weaker side, but there is reason for that, and we will talk on that very soon. Ultimately, on a higher powered magnified optics such as scopes in this 5 to 25 range, I'm not overly concerned with daytime bright illumination. As long as it's bright enough to create contrast in those dark shadowy areas, it should be fine. Doing a real quick check to see how stable the image is going to be here on a very rigid environment, it's so far pretty good. The exit pupil on this, we already saw earlier, is pretty standard all things considered, but the reticle does not lose its sharpness or focus no matter how far out we go into the shadows. So far, so good. Words alone cannot describe or express how wonderful they sound and feel. Hopefully that little snippet of video is enough to have you understand just how good they are. Just because the scope is very expensive doesn't mean that it's going to be any good. Sure, it might look good and feel good and have wonderful glass, but if it doesn't track good, then it's not really worth a damn, especially on something that's touted to be a professional rifle scope. Adjusting the side parallax, you see we don't have any sort of shift from the reticle to the target, and we don't have any sort of issues when we change the magnification. Everything goes right back to where we started. You will note that the reticle is slightly below my top center line. That's just where it lined up with the clicks. Illumination on full down here is not visible to the naked eye. As far as erector slop with the elevation, there is none. You move it one click, it moves one click. But you can see that where we are lined up right now is about as good as I can get it. Other than that, the reticle lines up to my tracking test paper basically perfect. This paper has seen better days. It went through a couple of really bad humidity spikes, which is why the bottom's curling up a little bit. I do plan on making a new target very soon with a full backer on it, but until that time comes, I backed out the magnification so we can see the full reticle lined up to the target before we start our little step test. But before we do the step test, we must check for slop with the windage and elevation turrets, to which, again, there is none. This thing's about as tight as a snare drum as you could possibly get. Any tighter, something might snap. No, I'm not being literal, I'm being metaphorical with that. This thing is really friggin' tight. Anyway, off to the step test. That's going to be 4 mils over and 4 mils up, and we should see a pretty good performance out of this thing. Because if you're spending as near as makes no difference $6,000, it better damn perform perfectly. Probably unsurprising to anyone watching this video, it lines up flawlessly. This is the best performance I've seen on a step test ever. Bringing the windage back to 0, and it lines up exactly where it needs to be, perfectly on the target. Anyway, we increased the mils totally to 10 on the elevation, and we're going to see exactly where it lines up. Again, the bottom of the paper you can see is twisting ever so slightly, which is probably going to account for that 1/10 of a mil that we are off when we're down there. I want to say, no, the scope is not perfect. It's not right, but the paper also isn't perfectly flat, so it could be pulling in a little bit more, and it could cause some issues. I'm going to have to give it a pass on this one. I'm going to have to say that the scope is in the right here and that my target is in the wrong. Guess what? Nothing could always be perfect, especially when there's human error that could possibly be involved. So that one I'm going to mark up for myself being slightly off. I do not think the scope is off in the slightest. And more proof of that is when we do bring this back to 0, you can see at the very bottom edge that the 10 mils on the reticle itself is slightly favoring the bottom of that line. So I'm definitely going to give it a pass on this one and say it tracks perfectly well. I ended up having the scope for several months. And in that time, I was still living in my apartment, so I was able to get some good views out of my old living room window. Unfortunately, being the tail end of the winter, with a very white, overcast sky, it does weird things with the lighting. But nevertheless, this thing should be able to perform past all of those imperfections when it comes to environmentals. Again, when you have really good glass, it should be able to look past a lot of that stuff. Focusing on our 30-yard power transformer, this thing should not get clear when we're at maximum magnification. Again, because the minimum side parallax on this thing is 50 meters. And as you can see, it's just shy of being able to come into focus. So for all you people out there planning on buying a Tangent Theta 525 Professional to throw on your airsoft gun or BB gun or pellet gun or rimfire gun, I hate to say it, you gotta shoot outside of 50 meters, at least on maximum magnification. I'm going to dwell here at 5x at 400 meters for a second, just so you could take in just how wonderful this image looks. Look at the tree over there at the 9 o'clock position. You can count almost all of those little individual branches here with ease. Resolution is far more important than a larger magnification number, and I cannot stress this enough. That is what Tangent Theta is going for with this scope. I cannot vouch for the rest of their lineup, but for this 525 Professional, again, after having it for several months, they don't try to get the largest view looking through it. They don't try to get the least amount of scope body on the outside of the image when you're looking through it. They don't try to get the maximum magnification out of it. They could have easily made this a 6:36, but at the cost, possibly, potentially, of ultimate resolution and color transparency. There are no imperfections to the glass on this thing. There is zero chromatic aberration. There's zero aberrations of any kind, even green. The colors on this thing are as true to life as possible. This isn't the first time we've seen a scope here at 400 yards at maximum magnification when you can count all the individual bricks on that wall, but it just seems to really come to life a little bit more here with the scope. The contrast on it is exceptional. You can see where all the mortar is in between the bricks. It is simply superb, ladies and gentlemen. I had mentioned it earlier, and this thing truly does produce an image sharper than what my camera can really pick up. I think this thing's at the absolute cusp of what is capable through a magnified optic for a rifle. Now, do I think it's the best thing out there? I like to think that there's always something better. There are more expensive scopes out there. Just look at some Hensoldt scopes, for example. Those usually start with the number in like the sevens. So $2,000 more than what this scope is going for right now. And that's just, it's absurd to think about. But there are very expensive top tier things out there. Not to say that this isn't one of them, but it's not the only thing that's out there. And that is something that we must be mindful of. Another question you're probably asking yourself is this scope in the land of diminishing returns? Well, again, that is something we're going to be talking about probably more or less in the comparison segment. 900 yards on this power tower, and can you find any real imperfections on this thing? Again, the sharpness and clarity on this is so much so that you could basically see all the rivets that are holding all those struts together. Wonderful. But can it keep the image sharpness and clarity even when we are slightly off perfect center? Well, the answer is yes. However, here at 25x, it does seem a little tight. I will give that as a point, but I will also retract most of that point just by how sharp and clear both the reticle and the image stay until literally you can't look through it anymore. And despite the fact that my setup might not be the most rigid, I do not see any shifting from the reticle to the tower when I am shifting everything over. Everything stays perfectly lined up, which is something to note. Every once in a while, there will be scopes that I will do this to where the reticle starts to float, meaning that the parallax is not set properly and the reticle basically is not at the same plane of existence as the target downrange. This does not have that problem. I stepped the magnification down to 20x and we have a very similar performance, albeit with a little bit more forgiving of an eyebox. No duh, as you go down in magnification, the exit pupil gets larger and thus you have more wiggle room to get behind the scope in a, let's say, not so desirable position. Again, the reticle and the image remain very sharp all the way to the point where you can't look through it anymore. That is happily a trend that we are going to see all the way down on its course to 5x. So I'm going to skip from 20x all the way down to 5 because the rest basically perform exactly as you'd expect it to be, better and better and better. No matter how good this is, if you wanted more of a forgiving eyebox and exit pupil on an optic, the lower down you go in the magnification range, almost despite what the magnifier is. Let's say you were looking behind a 3 to 18. At 3x, it's going to be better than this thing could be at 5x, even if you're talking about this thing being a $6,000 scope versus a $600 scope. Most of the time, that's going to be relevant despite cost on the scope product. The raw numbers really can't be beat much more than what they are. Showcasing a much more dynamic approach, starting at 5x and working our way up, you can see we have a very large amount of room to wiggle side to side, back and forth, up and down on, again, for a 5 to 25. If you wanted more than this, step down to an MPVO of some sort in the 4x to 3x magnification on the bottom end. Despite that, we still have a very stable looking image. The reticle does not shift on our piece of 2x4 here at 80 yards. And the same can be said as we slowly increase the magnification. The only thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a much more tighter eyebox as we get higher and higher, just like what we saw at the 900-yard power tower. The illumination here is on full, and you can just make it out against this tree. It's still pretty bright outside, but yet it was overcast and slightly drizzly. Nevertheless, though, it's enough, just enough, in these environments to create contrast if you needed it against a dark object. Truth be told, if I was focusing on this piece of wood to take a shot on it, I would have the illumination off, but I have it here to illustrate how much of it you can see when you are not behind it perfectly fine. You could actually see a little bit of it when you're off into the shadows, which is a lot more than I can say for a lot of other scopes out there. Typically, scopes in the first focal plane, once you see the shadow, you cannot see the illumination. This allows you to see a little bit of the illumination when you're off into the shadows, which will help you draw your eye to the center if you are running illumination and you have a really bad position behind the gun. But if you're running this thing on a gun, odds are more than likely you're going to be good enough to get yourself into a good position. However, I cannot vouch for that because this scope isn't going to make you a better shooter. It's just going to increase your capabilities if you are a good shooter. I cannot stress that enough. A good shooter with a $1,000 complete rig will outshoot any novice shooter with even a $10,000 rig. But an advanced marksman with this thing will probably be unstoppable. I'm very blessed that I was still able to focus on our 1,000-yard building back when I could. And here at 25x at 0 mils of added elevation, despite the mirage that we have in the air, the image is sharp, clear, and crisp, just like what we saw earlier. It was the same day, so we had the same conditions. It was overcast and just really gray outside, but nevertheless, the colors pop well enough, and you can make a lot of contrast out between the trees, the house, all the little individual panes of glass over there, and all the individual pieces of vinyl siding. It is still wonderful. In fact, just look at the roof. Look at that asphalt roof. You could almost count the tiles on this roof at 1,000 yards. Again, we're only at 25x. We have looked at this same exact house over the years with scopes going up to 36x. And even though things like the Gen 3 Razor HD are exceptionally good scopes, especially for the money, or at least they were, now they're upwards of $3,000, this thing still just has a little bit more polish to it. Increasing the elevation to 10 mils, getting back on target, we have almost no loss of sharpness. The mirage is still pretty prevalent and messing with our image ever so slightly, but the sharpness is still there as long as the wind settles down. I can't stress this enough. I was upset having to use this window, but it was nice to have it. In conditions like this, when it's below freezing and the apartment was very hot, I could not help the mirage. It's just what it was. You might have noticed that the image did brighten up a little bit, and that is because I adjusted the camera to accordance with the exit pupil as it shifted when we increased the elevation. So there was a very minor shift of about a 32nd of an inch, but it's still something to note. It did shift on me a little bit. So if you do have a very tight cheek weld to begin with, and you do add a lot of elevation, you might have to bury your face into the stock a little bit more. Let's see how well this thing performs in lower light environments. This is currently not what I consider a low light environment, but it's about to get a whole lot darker in about another hour or two after I film this. Illumination here on full, like we saw earlier, is okay. It's decent. To look through downrange at my 81-yard paper target with the naked eye, or in this case the raw camera, versus looking through the scope, there isn't really that much of a noticeable difference with brightness to my eye. And that is the same whether we're here at 5x or all the way up at the maximum magnification of 25x. This is a very simple target. It's not that far away, but nevertheless, if there were to be a darkening to the image, we would notice it right away. Let's do that same test, but about an hour and a half later, well after the sun had set. It was still a slightly overcast day. Looking downrange with just the raw camera, you can see that that tree is kind of hard to pick up against the bushes behind it, but looking through the scope, you can easily pick up the color differences. The tree is clearly brown, the bushes on the left and the right are clearly mostly green, and the illumination here is much, much more usable. At 5x, there's, as to my eye, again, very little to no loss of through brightness. But it doesn't stop there. In fact, all the way at 25x, the image looks exactly the same as it did at 5x. The steps on the illumination are about as precise as everything else on this scope has been so far. You can fine-tune the brightness in these conditions to whatever suits your needs perfectly. And not just here through the naked eye, but with night vision as well. Now, I'm doing this pretty janky. I've got my PVS 14 on my head with my Grec-X recorder on it, and looking through this thing, you can very clearly see where the tree is, where the tree ends, and what the bushes look like. The illumination on minimum is gorgeous. Look at that. Absolutely wonderful. Now, true, You would use a clip-on night vision device if you were to actually want to use a scope like this in night vision environments. But even just to look through it and get extra magnification downrange with just a head mount, helmet mount, PVS 14 like this, you could still use the damn thing. That was a trick I was not expecting to see up its sleeve. But from there, let's get into some comparisons. I'm going to start this comparison segment off with the scope that I've reviewed that's probably the most similar, which is the Minox ZP5 5-25 by 56. Very similar. These things are almost identical when it comes to its raw sizes and weights. The Tangent Theta 525 comes in, yes, at 5800. The ZP5 is around 3200. So as near as makes no difference, half the price. As far as the weight, the TT comes in at 40 ounces, the ZP5 at around 34 ounces. Field of views are identical, 24.9 feet to 5.2 feet. I believe that is at 100 meters. So factor that in a little bit when it comes to yardage. It would be about 10% less. Here's the thing that really threw me for a loop. The exit pupil on the TT is 11 millimeters to 2.3, which isn't bad at all. But for the ZP5, it's 12 millimeters to 4.4 millimeters. That is a tremendously huge difference. Both of them have 3.5 inches of eye relief. Now, both of these just so happen to be filmed at the same time of year, just a few years apart. And unfortunately for the ZP5, I've fine-tuned my skills. I've honed them like a fine edge of a katana to slice through bodies of prisoners. So the TT is going to be better no matter what. But the ZP5 was good to my eye, but not great. It did have a tracking issue. If you've never seen the video on that, well, probably odds are you haven't, because the video never really did all that well. I also reckon the TT is not going to do all that well either, because people like to watch videos of scopes that they can afford, and you know what? I cannot say I blame them. But the ZP5 had a massive tracking issue. As you jog over the windage, the elevation would shift, and the same with adjusting the elevation, the windage would shift. I never sent it back to Minox because they needed me to pay for shipping to going in, pay for shipping to coming back, pay for all the insurance, and pay for the repairs. Yeah, I didn't want to be hit with a $1,300 bill from them. And is the scope worth it? No. It sits on my shelf waiting to go on my brother's gun, which he'll never use. So it's like, you know what? It is what it is. It's cool to look at and play with every once in a while, but it's one of those things that doesn't fill me full of confidence when you're buying a scope that might not have a great warranty. But if you can afford these things outright, you can afford to keep them running, very similar to buying a very high-end luxury item such as a car. You might be able to afford a $300,000 car brand new, so when it's time to service it for $25,000, you pull that out like it's not even nothing. Between these two, though, the Tangent Theta wins hands down by my comparison and to my eye, and for all of my personal preferences, despite the massive price difference. Next up is another 5x multiplier scope, but it's a 4-20. It is the Zero Compromise Optics 420. This is a 4-20 by 50 magnified. I'm going to say it's more of an MPVO than it is an HPVO, but basically just splitting hairs. The ZCO, to mark what I had said during that review, it was an experience. Similar to the Tangent Theta, it is uncompromising when it comes to its overall build quality, fit, finish, and overall qualitative feel and performance. But you're still going to shell out a little bit more than $4,000 for one of these. Maybe if you find them on sale, you'll get them for the high threes, or used, maybe low threes to high twos if you're lucky. If you could find one of those for that price, it would be really hard to say no. It was one of my favorite scopes that I ever reviewed. Unfortunately, I had limited time with it when my good patron provider at the time, Scott, had sent it in because he needed to offload it because he had some expenses that had come up. As far as these two side-by-side comparisons on paper, they're actually kind of different. The ZCO is about 4 inches shorter than the Tangent Theta, about 4 ounces lighter, has better field of view because, again, it's a lower magnification range, but nevertheless the numbers are 28 feet to 6 feet. And the exit pupil is actually smaller than what it is with the tangent theta, which is kind of perplexing. I didn't expect to see that number, but who knows how accurate that number really is. All of them have 3.5 inch of eye relief. As amazing as the tangent theta is to look through it with its resolution, sharpness, and clarity, the ZCL is not very far behind it, but it is aided in the fact that it's only a 20x on the top end, not a 25. If I was to back out the tangent theta to about 20x, it would be really, really close between these two. However, I really do think that these scopes aren't direct competitors and are targeted at completely different audiences. So you got to figure out what's going to be best for your setup. The Gen 3 Razor HD 6-36x56 is a hell of an optic. It does everything exceedingly well. Even though its tracking test was off by a few minor percent, it really wasn't that bad. But here at 6x on the RHD G3, that reticle is much harder to pick up than even this XR Fine Gen 3 on the tangent theta. Bringing them both to their maximum magnifications on very similar targets at the same distance at 100 yards, as impressive as the Razor is, the tangent theta is just better. There is more sharpness, there is better clarity, the colors are better represented, and it's just a better overall image. But you do get 12x more with the Razor. Let's crunch some numbers, shall we? The Gen 3 Razors go for around $3 grand, so about half the price of the tangent theta. As far as the length, the Razor is actually about 1.5 inches shorter. It is 5 ounces heavier, but the field of view is going to be different again because the magnification range is going to be substantially different. You have 21.3 feet at the minimum to 3.5 feet at the maximum versus 24.9 to 5.2. The exit pupil is also going to be much smaller when it comes to the Razor, and it only comes in at 9.3 millimeters to 1.6. Again, reference that to 11 to 2.3 with the TT. Both of them have 3.5 inches of eye relief. These two, again, are similar, but not really all that similar. It's really hard to justify the tangent theta for $6,000 when you can buy 2 Razor HD Gen 3s for the price of 1 TT, at least the 525 Professional. And that was a question that I wanted to bring up. Is the tangent theta in the land of diminishing returns? I believe if you put it side by side against a Gen 3 Razor HD like seen here, and you tell someone that you can buy 2 Razors for the price of 1 TT, at least the 525 Professional, I think they would absolutely 100% unanimously say, absolutely, I'd rather have a Razor and $3,000 to play with by building a super precision rifle. But I don't think that these two scopes are marketed at the same people. And again, I'll get to that in the conclusions. Despite the fact that these two might be similar enough, despite the great difference in the magnification ranges, the Razor HDs in general are still focused at a more budget-friendly person. I know, not myself, but for many people that seems to be the case. The tangent theta is really for the professional PRS shooter, the guy that's got hundreds of thousands of dollars of prize money on the line, or a sponsored shooter that wants to make sure that their name is on the top of the leaderboard so they get them the best quality stuff possible. The last comparison I'm going to make is with the least expensive option, which is the Bushnell MPED Match Pro ED. It's got to be the ED, folks, because if it's not, then it's not the 5 to 30. This $700-ish HPVO might be made in China. It might also not have all the finite finish that any of the other scopes that we've looked at so far has, but it's got a couple things up its sleeve. It's got exceptionally good glass for the price. It tracks very well. It's got a fantastic reticle, and it's got all the basic features that I myself, at least, would look for in a scope like the MPED. Is it a competitor against the tangent theta? Not even close. I'm throwing this out there for if you are watching this video and you do own an MPED, or you're thinking about buying an MPED, could you compare it to a TT? Maybe. Maybe on like a single strand of hair on the back of a camel walking through the desert. Maybe there's just that one little hope that it might actually be able to go toe-to-toe with a scope that costs 8 times the price. But if you only have $700 to spend, you're not even going to contemplate making this decision. But also, again, like I said, in the very beginning of this video, you're not going to buy the TT because you want to. You're going to buy it because you can. And that is neatly going to roll us into my final thoughts. This scope is not for everybody. It's for someone who's going to take the shooting sports extremely seriously, whether they're buying it themselves, being given it by a company, or just get lucky enough to win one at a match. When you look at the PRS leaderboards and who the top shooters are and what they are using gear-wise, you will see the name Tangent Theta up there more than once by a few times. And that is all you need to know about Tangent Theta. When they say that this is a 5 to 25 professional, they really do mean it. And I completely understand why. I myself am a huge fan of having locking turrets on all of my scopes. But you know who aren't? PRS shooters. Because if they have to make an adjustment on the fly, they don't want to have to worry about a lock possibly getting in the way or slowing them down in the slightest. They want to be able to just click, go. I know this for a couple of reasons. One, I've seen a lot of match footage, and when I was doing the, well, you haven't seen it yet, but the track torque videos on the 5 to 30, or is it the 4.5 to 30? There's too many numbers in my head right now. But those turrets, like you might have seen on the 4 to 20 video, those turrets lock way too easily by accident. They unlock easily and they lock easily. So what some people would do on the larger magnification versions of the track torques, they'll actually remove the lock inside. They'll machine it out, so this way you don't ever have to worry about it accidentally locking or unlocking for you. It's just always ready to go all the time. And I get it. I absolutely get it. Is it for me? No, because I'm not a PRS shooter. But if I was, and there was money on the line, or I was good enough to be able to ask for any gear that I wanted from my sponsors, whoever they might be, what would I want? Would I want a Gen 3 Razor HD, or would I want this? I mentioned it earlier. I've mentioned it in many of my videos. Magnification is not everything. I'd much rather have higher resolution, higher sharpness, better color representation, and less issues, less chromatic aberration, for example. A more stable image and reticle sharpness when I'm looking through it at a slightly tweaked angle because I'm in a really weird and awkward position. I don't care about having extra magnification. I care about having more useful magnification. And for me, a 5 to 25 for extended distances would not be the end of the world. Hell, I stick with MPVOs because I'd much rather have, again, lower magnification, but of a higher quality lens, because for me, that's far more important, and I shoot better with those style of scopes, at least for the shooting that I do, which is typically inside of 600 yards, which is well out of the realm of most PRS shooters. This 525 professional is exactly that. It's for professionals, someone who I am clearly not. If I could afford one, if I was building a rig to get into PRS and I had unlimited budget, this is something that I would strongly, strongly consider for all the reasons that I've mentioned in this video and have shown you time and time again. Everything on this thing is basically perfect. It's machined, it's designed, it's set up in a way that is just simply fantastic. There are things, though, that I would like to see, like a throw lever included on the magnification ring. Please and thank you. But other than that, is there anything else I could really complain about? Not really. Again, because this scope is designed for a very specific individual. It just so happens to be someone that I am not. Anyway, with that, a very, very huge thank you to the individuals over at Armament Technologies Incorporated, because they have been wonderful to deal with. I didn't even ask for this scope. The individual that I am in contact with over there said, "Hey, you're returning that Elkin. Would you like to see something else?" And I said, "Sure, send me whatever." And he goes, "How about this?" And I go, "Why the hell not?" I don't think it's going to do great numbers-wise because, again, this is out of the realm for most people's complete understanding. But hopefully, if you've watched this video to its entirety, you will at least understand and appreciate this scope a little bit more. And hopefully that would be all I could really ever ask for. Anyway, a huge thank you for all of you for watching. If you've made it through this 50-minute long video, I commend you wholeheartedly. Again, thank you all very much. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.